Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Joining us today is Frauke Seebass. She's an Associate Fellow at the German Council on Foreign Relations to discuss recent high-stakes diplomacy involving Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban and Bosnian Serb leader Milorad Dodik. Their controversial meeting in Budapest raises urgent questions about European stability, rule of law, and the fragile future of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Could the Western Balkans be slipping back into crisis? Well, Frauke, welcome to TVP World, and thank you for taking the time.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Now, before we start, there's a short soundbite that I'd like to share with you in the audience, and I'll get your take on it.
I believe that Republika Srpska must fight back. Of course, saying this might make this one of my last political speeches, but Republika Srpska has to respond, simply because it is under threat. They first go after the most prominent political figures, and once they've dealt with them, it's easy to move on to lower-ranking officials in Republika Srpska. And once that happens, there is no more Republika Srpska. I don't expect the opposition to say anything today except to rejoice in what happened. That alone says a lot about their political approach and judgment. I expect full support from Serbia. I will also turn to Russia for support.
Now that's pretty aggressive talk there, rhetoric, fighting back, he says, defending himself. It sounds like he's a victim because he has been convicted of not following the instructions of an EU commissioner who's responsible for applying the Dayton Accords, which were agreed in 1995. Your thoughts on that clip there?
Yes, thank you. So I think it is very much in line with Dodik's prior statements, including 2 days ago at a meeting in Sremski Karlovci, where they were commemorating the 30-year anniversary of Operation Storm during the post-Yugoslav wars, where the self-declared Republika Krajina was liberated, in the word of the Croatian army, or destroyed in the name of the Krajina Republic at the time. And we saw the same rhetoric, both by Dodik, but also by Serbian President Vučić. And we had the same characteristics that we also saw in this clip right now. So this victimization, this basically personification of Serbianhood. So I am the one who's protecting all Serbs everywhere. And this was also echoed by Vučić and also by the Patriarch of the Serbian Orthodox Church during this meeting. And this is also something that we've had consistently heard both from Dodik and from Vučić and other prominent Serb figures.
Understood. So what does this mean on the ground? It doesn't sound as though the Dayton Accords are going to be consistently applied, resulting in the outcomes that were originally envisioned, does it?
It depends, I think, a lot on what is going to happen now in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So, as we've heard, both Dodik and Vučić and also Orban have not recognized the verdict that was given. But we will see if they will be able to implement it nonetheless. We've also seen that the party of Milorad Dodik has declared the verdict invalid, and they are trying to establish already for some time these separate institutions in Republika Srpska to basically separate it from the way that the constitution was designed after the Dayton Agreement. And I think especially these remarks, even though, as I said, they're in line with what we've heard, at least for the past decade, I don't think that makes them less worrying, because they are very much in line with a concept that is known as the Serbian world, which has been used by Serb nationalists at different times throughout the last century and a half even. And this idea that Serbs, wherever they live, share the same destiny, they should be united in territory. which is often referred to as the Greater Serbia, and then which includes Serbia, Republika Srpska, Kosovo, Montenegro, and in some readings also Krajina, the former Krajina Republic in modern-day Croatia. And it goes back to medieval mythology, and it is also, and this I think is a key issue as well, it's very much aligned with this concept of the Russian world, which was used, among others, to justify the annexation of Crimea and also of the invasion of Ukraine.
Understood. Now, I want to come to the implications of the relationships or overlap, I suppose, with the Russian world, as you put it. But before that, Viktor Orban and Hungary, why is he getting involved in what happens?
So we've seen already for some time this alignment, let's say, of an axis between Budapest, Belgrade, and Banja Luka, where we see very similar developments of increasingly authoritarian leaders who use these ethno-nationalism that we've seen with the Serbian world, but also with an illusion of the Hungarian government very frequently to the Greater Hungary territory, which was a historic fact in the 19th century and ended basically finally with the Treaty of Trianon in 1920. And this is something that you hear very often in this rhetoric as well. So the way that they are using these ethno-nationalist and historic grievances to gain popular support and also remain in power, and at the same time dismantle his democratic structures in the back from within, and also align themselves with Russia. We've seen visits by all of them to Moscow even recently, and of course Dodik. Dodik himself can always count on the support of Vučić and also of Orban, and Orban, of course, being kind of the defender of this kind of illiberal democracy, as he calls it, in the European Union, which of course gives him a lot of leverage because, for example, there were no sanctions against Dodik, even though there was a great majority among European member states to apply these, because the European Union has the principle of unanimity when it comes to foreign policy decisions. There could be no unified voice, no unified sanctions. So this has been a very useful connection also both for Dodik and for Vučić.
Right. So I mean, the historic connection, the story, if you like, that Dodik and Orban and Putin have been using, is that really why they're behaving like this? Or are there other underlying outcomes that they're looking for?
I really think that this is something that helps them to stay in power, to get popular support. And we see that in all of the countries, even though, of course, there have been large-scale protests, both in Serbia, also to a certain extent in Hungary, where we see that the polls are getting lower and lower for Orban and his party. But still, there is a very strong basic support based on these narratives that are also spread through government media or government-controlled media, which is most of the media, both in Serbia and Hungary, and which very much connects to the people and to their nationalist pride to a certain extent. Of course, there are a lot of other measures that are used, and especially before elections, that are gaining their support. But I don't think that this is a real deep-seated idealism. I think it is something that they are using as a tool to keep power. But that being said, it does not mean that this is not dangerous, because especially this narrative that we see in Serbia, or the Serbian world, so to say, and also to a certain extent in the other two examples we're discussing, of course, foster this idea that there are victims of a certain West, for example, of the European Union, of NATO. This is, of course, often referred to in the Serbian context, given the NATO strikes in 1999 of NATO in Serbia and Serbian territory. And of course, it has an impact on the perception of people as well. And especially when we have this idea of a Serbian world that is rightfully ours, based on a very long history. And this actually dates back to the 14th century, where a certain Serbian prince gave up his earthly kingdom for a heavenly kingdom that was promised for the future. And basically, if you have this basis, and if you have this very strong connection to this nationalist idea, also in connection with a certain racism, with a certain dehumanification of people that are living in those territories and of other people, mostly Muslims in this context. We saw in the 1990s what this can lead to, and we see very worrying signs now of the use of these very narratives, this very rhetoric that we've also seen in the 80s prior to the eruption of to the beginning of the post-Yugoslav wars in Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina and Kosovo.
So quite concerning all in all. Now, I'd like to focus in the last few minutes that we have left on what Russia, what Putin is doing. Where do you see his influence in either of both of these countries, both in Hungary and in Serbia and Serbia and Herzegovina?
So the way I see it is that they are mostly using this connection to present themselves in a certain light. We have, for example, had a discussion for a long time about the Russian influence in Serbia. And I think all of the research that we've seen on this points to the fact that this is something that the Serbian government is using very actively to pursue a policy of balancing between the East and the West. So on the West being the EU and the US, and on the other side being Russia on the one hand and China on the other, and to establish itself in between. This is also connected to a certain disengagement that we've seen from the side of the EU since 2014. And I think with the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, there was a moment where he was sure that he would have to stop doing this. But then he realized that the attention was still not back on Serbia. And he, for example, very closely in time to the full-scale invasion, managed to get new gas contracts in favor of Serbia with the Russian government. And he still has this policy of where, in the rhetoric, the country is much closer to China and Russia. And this is also, therefore, the perception of the people of Serbia often, the same for Republika Srpska, that this is actually where they're mostly aligned with. Whereas if you look at the facts, it is still the EU and the EU member states where all the trade is happening, or most of the trade is happening. Serbia, China, this has been a bit bigger, but still most of the trade relations, most of the bilateral relations are still with the West. But again, this is very much subdued in the public discourse, and therefore also people generally have a very positive image of Russia and of Putin, especially because of this narrative that we've also discussed of, those, Dodik said they, so this kind of this West, whichever that is, that has taken away things from us. In the case of Serbia, taken away Kosovo from us, whereas Putin is protecting us as a people and as a territory. We've seen this very clearly with the visit of the Serbian patriarch in Moscow in April, where he thanked Putin and the Moscow Patriarch for protecting the territory.
Unfortunately, Frauke Seebass, we have to end it there, but thank you so much for your analysis. Very fragile and complex situation, so we look forward to inviting you again in the near future. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much, Hashim.
Thank you.
Have a good evening as well.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, though. As always, lots more coming up. Bye.